Final Fantasy has 16 mainline games, a dozen or so spin-offs, and no clear starting point. Ask 10 fans where to begin and you'll get 10 different answers. Some say go old school, others say modern, but in truth, the answer is a bit of both. As someone who's played nearly every entry, let me help you figure out which Final Fantasy you should try first. We begin our recommendations with a somewhat controversial entry, Final Fantasy 15. FF15 was a mess at launch, one playable character, missing story elements, and a painful last couple of chapters. But today it's a whole different game, and one that's surprisingly decent for newcomers. In the years following its release, Final Fantasy 15 released several significant updates that transformed the experience. The story's been cleaned up, the ending reworked, and you can now play as every character. It's not perfect, but it's far better, especially when you don't have any other Final Fantasies to compare it to. But why is FF15 a good place to start? To begin with, it's a more recent entry, which makes it more approachable for modern players. It features a fantastic main cast and one of the most memorable antagonists in the series.
Arden Izulia, Chancellor of Niflheim, at your humble service.
The gameplay is dynamic, with each character offering a completely different playstyle to the point it can feel like you're playing an entirely new game, which keeps combat fresh and lets players discover the style that best suits them. But perhaps the best reason to consider Final Fantasy 15 is how easy it is to tell whether the game is right for you before you commit to playing it. On YouTube, there's a free 5-part miniseries titled Brotherhood Final Fantasy 15, which focuses on the backstories and relationships of the 4 main characters. If you find yourself enjoying the miniseries and becoming invested in the main cast, there's a good chance you'll enjoy the game itself. If not, then it might be worth exploring another entry in the series instead. Like our next choice, which is not only a fan favorite, but also directly inspired one of Final Fantasy XIV's most beloved storylines. Final Fantasy IV was the game to introduce the iconic active time battle system, and one of the first in the series to deliver a truly character-driven narrative. Final Fantasy IV is widely regarded as one of the best entries in the franchise, with many of its characters going on to serve as archetypes that would shape the series for decades to come. Its influence extends beyond its own era. The game's story directly inspired the critically acclaimed Shadowbringers expansion, with the Warrior of Light following a journey strikingly similar to 4's protagonist, Cecil. And while 4's story is often praised for its sweeping scope, its greatest strength lies in its pacing. From the opening moments, the stakes are clear and the momentum never falters. The game consistently drives the player forward with virtually no slowdowns or lulls. It's tightly constructed, always moving, always engaging. It might not be Final Fantasy's most complex or emotionally rich narrative, but it is undoubtedly the best paced. That alone makes it an excellent starting point for newcomers. The fast pace helps the game avoid the slow, meandering introductions that often deter players unfamiliar with the genre. Even better, the story is highly approachable and has broad appeal. This is partially due to its heavy inspiration from Star Wars, featuring a conflicted hero caught between light and dark and a powerful antagonist clad in black armor. Now, the last big benefit for newcomers is the fact that there's various ways to actually play Final Fantasy IV. You're not limited to the original 2D version. Final Fantasy IV also has a full 3D remake, complete with added content and voice acting.
Is a crystal worth all this? Robbing a peaceful people of what's theirs by right.
And if you do prefer the classic style, the new Pixel Remaster offers a faithful, modernized version of the original. But if you want to experience the perfect representation of what the series has to offer, then look no further than Final Fantasy X. This is the game most fans recommend to newcomers, and for good reason. Its story is both compelling and well-paced, the characters are memorable and thoughtfully written, and the visuals have aged gracefully, making it one of the most approachable entries for modern players. But 10's biggest draw is likely its gameplay. Why? Well, unlike most earlier entries, Final Fantasy X replaces the ATB system with a timeline-based combat system that allows players to strategically manipulate both their own actions and the enemy's turn order. You can also switch between party members mid-battle, an underrated mechanic that adds a welcomed layer of flexibility and tactical depth. Even the progression system breaks from tradition. Instead of leveling up through experience points and incremental stat boosts, Final Fantasy X introduces the Sphere Grid, grid, a vast interconnected skill tree shared by all party members. Each character begins in a distinct section of the grid aligned with their role, but as the game progresses, you can guide them into other areas, allowing for deep customization and creative builds. Taken together, these elements make Final Fantasy X not just one of the best RPGs in the series, but one of the best in the genre. It's a perfect introduction for new players and a showcase of how traditional JRPG elements can evolve without losing their core appeal. So we've talked about my recommendations, but what about the other games that people recommend, and why don't I? Well, let's start with Final Fantasy VI. While it's often considered one of the best entries in the series, it can be overwhelming for newcomers, especially those unfamiliar with the genre. By contrast, Final Fantasy IV's shorter runtime and brisk pacing makes it far more accessible. 6 is better appreciated once you know you're going to enjoy the older games and are more comfortable with classic RPG design. Then there's Final Fantasy IX, another critically beloved title that frequently appears alongside 10 and 6 in fan rankings. And while it's certainly not a bad game to start with, it was designed as a love letter to the earlier titles in the series. As a result, it lands best if you already have some familiarity with the past entries. When it comes to the modern games, some might suggest starting with Final Fantasy 16 over 15. While 16 is a solid game, I find it strays too far from the series' roots. It leans heavily into action and lacks many of the core RPG systems that define the franchise. While 15 does have its flaws, it still retains those fundamental RPG elements that give new players a better sense of what the rest of the series is going to be like. And of course, there's Final Fantasy VII. It's easily the most iconic game in the franchise, but it hasn't aged particularly well, especially from a visual standpoint, which may be off-putting for newcomers. The story and characters are still exceptional and absolutely worth experiencing. I just recommend waiting until you're already invested in the series to give it a try. As for the Final Fantasy VII remakes, I'd argue they're actually the strongest modern entries overall. However, it's hard to recommend them as a starting point since the story is incomplete. If you end up enjoying the experience, you'll be stuck waiting years for the final chapter. That said, if you don't mind waiting for all 3 parts to be released, then the remake series is likely a better starting point than Final Fantasy XV. That said, you can find links to all the recommended games down in the description, and if you want a deep dive into the Final Fantasy series, check out this video covering its long and fascinating history. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.